G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 6 of True Blue Conversations with your host Adam Bloom, the author of Easy Target, now available at adambloom.com.au. 8 years ago, after returning from 3 tours of Afghanistan and then gaining experience and education in financial planning, Warren Loudon teamed up with fellow veteran Dave Vaughan and started Loudon and Vaughan Private Wealth, founded with the underlying belief that every person matters and every dollar counts, providing comprehensive tailored financial advice and wealth management services for you and your family. Loudon and Vaughan will guide you towards your financial goals with integrity and transparency. Whether you're planning for retirement, investing for the future, or managing your family's wealth, they've got you covered. Visit loudonandvaughan.com.au or call 02 9538 2704 to book a meeting with Warren today.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. Today I'm joined by a veteran from overseas who served as a police officer and also worked for the DEA and saw multiple deployments around the world, and he has joined us today to share his story and his life and his transition out of service. So Bret Hamilton, welcome to the podcast, mate. It's an absolute privilege to have you on.
Adam, it's a privilege to be here. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. And so before we get into your career as firstly a police officer and then we'll get into the work you did in the DA, can you talk me through your childhood, mate? What was life like growing up for a young Bret, and do you have any brothers and sisters, and what did you get up to as a young fella?
No, I loved, as I got older, I learned that I was a mistake to begin with. The best mistake that my mom and dad like to say that they ever made. So I used to give them a hard time. But no, my mom and dad were both former Marines. I was, I always like to joke that I was conceived at Parris Island, South Carolina, which is true. And, we moved away from there when I was just an infant, so I don't actually remember, but at the time. But I grew up in South Alabama, typical Southern kid, hunting, fishing, sports. Yeah, try my best to stay out of trouble, which, didn't work out always. But yeah, I survived.
What was schooling like for you, mate? Were you pretty academically gifted at school, or were you?
No, not even by any stretch of the imagination. No, I hated school. I hated everything about it. I hated PE, like you name it. I just couldn't stand the structure, the structure of it. And I hated sitting in class all the time. Believe me, it took every ounce of discipline I had to graduate, not just from high school, but from college. And I think the only reason I even was able to do so is because I wanted to be a Marine and a Marine Corps officer so bad that I was willing to at least, dig in and get it done. So
grit the teeth, mate, and get into it. And
right.
Did you, for you, that Marines background of your parents, is that what you always knew you wanted to do, or was it or did that come later as you got older?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I can't remember ever wanting to do anything else. Obviously, I met my dad's, a few of my dad's Marine Corps buddies when I was super young, and I remember, the camaraderie, the friendship that he had. Then listening to the stories of being overseas, and then obviously being in combat, and as a young kid, I'm sure a lot of your guests, would probably admit this, but you begin to romanticize it, and especially the service, within combat. And so, yeah, I mean, it just, it obviously, and look, I certainly don't want to downplay my mom's role in it too. I mean, I grew up listening to the stories of, the camaraderie that she enjoyed in the Marine Corps as well. So, I mean, it just, to me, it made sense, the listening to the culture as I grew older, finally meeting, some active duty Marines, listening to the jobs that they did on active duty and things like that. So it just made complete sense, even as a young child.
So with America's involvement in Vietnam, were those the stories that you were hearing from as a young fella?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So it makes you, every boy's dream, mate, of wanting to join up. But mate, before we get to that, at 15, you learnt to fly, and as you said, academically, it was a real struggle to get through high school. How did you get through learning to fly?
So it's funny. I had never thought about it, and I think I was probably 14. Yeah, I'm almost positive. Yeah, my dad and I just happened to be in the living room with my dad one night, and there was a story that came on about how much money captains, and I can't remember which airlines it was, but they were talking specifically about one particular airline, how much money they made. And my dad looked at me and he goes, "Son, you think that's something you'd be interested in?" I'm like, "Heck yeah, man, that sounds awesome." And I kid you not. So my dad was really good friends with a former SF guy, Army SF, who was the senior enlisted at the local National Guard unit, right? And his son, who was probably at least 5 or 6 years older than I am, had just gotten his CFI, Certified Flight Instructor certificate. And so he literally walks to the phone, didn't have, cell phones back then, goes to the wall, grabs the phone, and calls George. I'll never forget this conversation. "George, you think Billy could take Brett flying tomorrow?" And sure enough, the very next day, he takes me on a little flight. Adam, I fell in love with it, man. I just loved everything about it, and it's still today. Just like you could ask my wife. I come back from a couple of hours worth of flying, and I'm a new person, man. I just freaking love everything about it. Yeah, I love planning the flights. I love conducting the flights. I love talking to ATC, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's very relaxing.
It's very much like I know myself, mate. I ride motorbikes,
Yep.
for people who don't do it, they're like, oh, I could,
Right.
why do you ride a motorbike? It's like because it's that freedom. It's that
All
freedom
right.
of it's just you and the open road, and you got the wind blowing in your face. For you,
Yeah.
you're in the air. Like that's the best thing ever.
All right. Well, you're going to love this story then. So I never had any desire to ride a motorcycle. Never, ever. My son, who's in his mid 30s now, I guess it was about 2018 maybe, says he wants to buy a motorcycle, right? And I'm like, "Oh, Jesus, we're going to be buying a coffin for him, and within a year." So I asked him, I was like, "All right, well, look, take this course, take a riding course for me at least." I mean, he's in his late 20s at the time, so it's not like I'm going to tell him no, right?
Yep.
I said, "Take this riding lesson at the local Harley Davidson store." And my son's just like me, hated everything about school, you name it. And so I decided to sign up for the course as well. And my only goal was to make sure he paid attention. Like it scared my wife and I to death thinking about him being out on the open road on a motorcycle. Long story short, I freaking ended up falling in love with motorcycles. Just loved everything about it, man. And I had been out of flying for years and years because we just couldn't afford it. And getting on the motorcycle with him and out being just riding in the open with him, it made me want to get back into flying again. So that was kind of like the precipitance that brought me back, into that whole general aviation thing. So
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. And do you still go riding with your son today?
no, we're both without motorcycles, and I swear every day before the weekend's over, he'll end up sending me a link, to a new motorcycle or something that we ought to get. So yeah, we're
Yes.
both trying to figure out how to get back into it.
I'm the same, mate. I haven't
Yeah.
got one at the moment, and it kills me whenever it's a beautiful sunny day and you sit there and go, "Oh God, it'd be a good day to ride today." But yeah,
Exactly, it's torture.
one day, mate, one day. So in 1984, you joined the Reserve Marines, and what was the decision for that, mate, of going reserves and not full time at that point in your life?
Well, because I was, so in order to be a Marine Corps officer, you have to complete college. You have to get a 4-year degree. And when I thought about, trying to do active duty, nothing was going on at the time. There were no hot spots, happening in 1984, other than, I mean, the Beirut bombing had just occurred. I think it had happened in 84, but no, it was 83, October 83. So right before I graduated, but the Marine Corps wasn't deployed to any, hot spots. And I can literally remember thinking right before I graduated, about going on active duty. And I'm like, no, I got to hurry up and work on get my college degree so I can become an officer. But, the next best thing is to join the reserves while you're going to college. And oh, by the way, I've got to figure out a way to pay for college. So the reserves was a good way to do it, right? And I tell you, it ended up being a great unit. It's probably one of the more active Marine Corps Reserve units in the Marine Corps. I got to go to jump school, scuba school, all the cool guy stuff. And funny thing, when I was in Afghanistan during one of my deployments with the DEA, I actually did a couple of missions with Third Force Reconnaissance Company, which was the unit that I had joined right out of high school. So it was pretty cool.
So talk me through that process back then, Brett, because the internet didn't exist then. So what
Sure.
was the process to join the Marines back then?
It was getting in a car, driving somewhere, finding a Marine recruiter or going to the unit itself, which is what I did, and asking questions. Hey, if I join this unit, what all do I get to do? What's the process? Yeah, my recruiter was out of Pensacola, Florida, and he walked me through it. And of course, like any Marine Corps recruiter or military officer, he ends up screwing me in the long run by he has a quota, right? All military recruiters have quotas with regards to the types of jobs you have to join and sign up for and things like that. So he ended up signing me up for a freaking job it was a logistics job, but assigned to a force reconnaissance unit. And so, I get back to the unit. I'll never forget. They're looking at my orders, and they're like, "What the hell is this? Why are you signed up for logistics?" I'm like, you got to ask my recruiter that. I have no clue. So, it took a good year for me to get back on the right track and get to go to all the cool guy stuff. And so, luckily, I did. It ended up getting for my MOS qualification, Marine Occupational Specialty, or Military Occupational Specialty, my job as a Force Reconnaissance Marine. So yeah, it was cool.
And I know the process here is, and you've worked alongside a lot of the, special force guys, and like you go through, you join up, you go to basic training over here. Is it pretty much the same over in the US that you go to basic training and you go,
Yeah.
and how long is that process?
Yeah, so everybody east of the Mississippi River goes to Parris Island, South Carolina, the notorious island. And everybody goes to this through the same training, right? There's no difference between reservist and active duty. Although, at boot camp, all the drill instructors know, that you're a reservist. And so they call you the 90-day wonder and things like that, knowing that you're going to boot camp and then you're going back home or going to college or whatever. So in a lot of ways, you set yourself up for more torture than, even the active duty guys. But nevertheless, yeah, you go to Parris Island for 90 days. And then a lot of times you will either, go directly into your training, or as a reservist, you'll come back home for a couple of months before you go to your training, which is what I did. So
Then you finish your basic training. Do you have to parade? Is it like, do you have to give back time now that you're a reservist, or how's that work?
well, yeah, I mean, once a month you're at your unit conducting training, you name it. And then every year you do a minimum of 2 weeks of training, right?
Yeah, right.
Now,
And
in my case, so I had to go through all these qualification schools. So in addition to the normal 2 weeks and the normal 2 days a month, I would also go to, like 3 weeks of jump school, 5 weeks of scuba school. I think it was a 2 week scout swimmer course that I had to go to. So there was a lot of additional stuff that I went to as well. But I mean, man, I would have done it full time, but unfortunately I had to go to college too. So yeah, it was a blast.
then so you finish your college, and then in 1988 you actually go full time. And this is, as you're saying, this is still it's a holding pattern for most armies around the world, really, and then it starts to ramp up in years to come. But in 1988, you go full time, and what was that like? Did you have to do some more training to then become a full time Marine?
Oh, of course. Yeah, so all Marine Corps officers, and let's back up. So in 87, my wife and I got married. In 88, man, I'm gonna get all screwed up with the years now, but yeah. And then my daughter was born, that's right, in 87. 88, we go on active duty, we go to Quantico, Virginia. And so all Marine Corps officers, no matter what their MOS is, their job, they all go through officers candidate school, which I had done, the year prior while I was in college still. And then all Marine Corps officers go through what's called TBS, the basic school. And there's a ton of different nicknames for TBS, the Big Spin, Thousands Being Stupid, you name it. But it's the official name is the Basic School. And so the theory behind the 6 months training for all Marine Corps officers is to come out of it on the other side as a basic infantry officer. So just like enlisted Marines, every Marine is a rifleman. Every Marine Corps officer is expected to maintain the knowledge of a basic infantry officer, right? Worst case scenario, a logistics Marine officer, finds himself out on a convoy or something like that, taking infantry Marines somewhere, and bad things happen. All the other infantry officers are killed, wounded, taken off the battlefield. That logistics officer should be able to take charge and make things happen, close with and destroy the enemy. So yeah, it's a great course. I mean, obviously they've been doing it for freaking over 100 years and training out Marine Corps officers, to fight battles. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you're going to be a high-speed, F-18 pilot or, the low-speed logistics guy. You all go through that same suck, for 6 months. And then, obviously Marine Corps infantry officers go through another grueling 4 weeks or 4 months of training. The pilots will go through their 1 year of learning how to fly, aircraft and so on and so forth. But yeah, my wife was there. My daughter was born, so she was an infant while we were going through school. And then we were assigned to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And that's where we stayed for about just over, not quite 4 years. Yeah.
And then in that time, mate, the balloon goes up for Gulf War One, and
Right.
and talk me through this, mate, because Gulf War One. What was your role in Gulf War One?
Yeah, so I've got to tell this story too. Like so I became a military police officer, and the way the Marine Corps assigns officers to jobs is while you're in the basic school, if you don't have if you haven't if you don't have a guaranteed MOS, and usually the only guaranteed MOSs for Marine Corps officers are flight school and becoming a lawyer, a JAG officer. Those are typically the only two, right? So at the basic school, during that 6 month, you are graded on absolutely everything. I swear to God, I think they grade you on wiping your ass. And you're given a score for everything you do. And they use those scores to develop a quality spread. And so let's say you have, for my company, I think we had something like, I don't know, 300 officers that were training at the same time. Let's say you have 30 slots to fill for an infantry for infantry school. They divide the TBS class into thirds, the top third, middle third, and the bottom third. And they'll take those 30 MOSs for infantry and they'll give 10 to the top third, 10 to the middle third, and 10 to the bottom third. And so in Marine Corps, thought process, that's considered a quality spread, right? You don't want, all of your top guys, going to all infantry and then have the absolute worst, taking over logistics or whatever. And so I tell you, I just got completely screwed with the quality spread thing. I think I was in the bottom of the top third. And so, the only thing that was left was, the tire changer or some shit. I can't remember exactly what MOSs were left. But the moral of the story is I had been, while in college at Auburn, I had studied, criminology. And in order to graduate, you had to do an internship with one of the local departments. And so I had done my internship with the Lee County Sheriff's Office. And my very first night, I got into a foot chase and chased this guy down in the middle of the woods and just ran off and left, the deputy that I was riding with. And so I'm screaming at him in the woods. He can't find me. I don't have a flashlight or anything, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so I'm screaming at his name. I never forget his name was Butch. I'm like, Butch, I caught him. What do I do? He goes, put some handcuffs on him. I'm like, I don't have any handcuffs. And so the moral of the story is I just fell in love with it, man. My adrenaline was flowing. I had a great time. I was excited, And so it got me thinking about the whole law enforcement thing. And so the only thing that was left in combat arms, MOSs, was to become an MP in the Marine Corps. And in order to become an MP in the Marine Corps, you had to be what was called uniquely qualified. And so I had to write this damn paper about how I was uniquely qualified. And so I had to make up I didn't make it up, don't get me wrong. But I had worked, as an internship, really got some great experience. Got to actually 2 or 3 different foot chases, got to process arrestees, got to work a murder scene, with some detectives, murder, suicide, you name it. It was a great experience. And so I had to write a paper, with all this experience that I had done. So anyway, I became an MP. Wife and kid and I moved to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Now get back to the first Gulf War. So I had told my wife, who knew nothing about the military, much less the Marine Corps. I can't remember when, but somehow, for some reason, she had asked me a question about going to war. And I can remember telling her, don't worry about it. I'm an MP. If an MP gets deployed to war, it's really, really bad, right? Now skip forward a year and a half later, Saddam Hussein does his thing, goes into Kuwait. And Adam, I kid you not, I had 18 hours notice to have myself and my Marines on a ship to go to the Persian Gulf. My wife was beside herself. She looks at me, she goes, I thought you said MPs don't go to war. What is this? I mean, what's happening? You've got not only do you have a child, you've got a wife. Now I'm pregnant with our second kid, and now you're leaving us? What the hell? Yeah, it was an awful feeling, man. It was terrible. Yeah, 18 hours notice to get on a ship with my Marines and equipment. So
It sounds very similar to the Australian Army, mate, that I've heard that, yep, rapid deployment, let's go. You're away you go. And how long were you away for?
8 months.
Oh, jeez. That's
Yes,
yeah,
eight
right.
months.
Did you get to see the birth of your son, or
No,
was no, you missed? Oh no.
no, it was awful, man. Yeah.
You would have
Of
been in the
course.
dog, yeah, definitely in the doghouse.
Yeah, it was terrible. Obviously before the days of the internet, right? I didn't get a letter from my wife until I don't know, golly, probably 6 or 7 weeks into the deployment. The first letter I received was the second letter she had written. The mail system was so screwed up. I'm reading the letter, right? And it's all the stuff you would expect, the how the baby's doing, how the pregnancy going, blah, blah, blah. Second page of the first letter, second page. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, the first letter that I received, second page, first paragraph. I should be getting the car out of the shop. Hopefully everything will be okay. And that's it. Like, I'm like, what the hell happened to the car? And so it was like 2 weeks later, the first letter finally catches up, and she explains to me, yeah, the very next day after you left, I was backing out of the driveway and I left the door open after putting Ashley in the back seat. And as I'm backing up, the door catches the frame of
Oh no.
so here's my pregnant wife, with her, newly born daughters. And she freaking, tears off the door of the car, the day after I deployed to war.
Oh
So,
no.
yeah,
Oh, and snail mail
awful.
back then, mate. Snail mail,
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
did you have any close calls over there, mate, when you were first over there, or was it pretty you in sort of the safe sort of zone?
No, man, I was on ship the entire time. The night we went to war, they sounded battle stations. My Marines and I didn't have a battle station on ship, and so all I did was just pull the covers over my head and go back to sleep. So,
Oh no. Well, it would change down the track, and we'll get into that shortly,
yeah,
and
yeah.
definitely change. And so you have your deployment, you come back, and then you sort of have a chance meeting with DEA. You met someone from the DEA in 1992, and did did you know much about the DEA before that
No.
chance meeting?
All right. So, the only thing I really knew about DEA, prior to this was along the same timeline of the bombing in Beirut in '83. A former Marine named Kiki Camarena, who was a DEA agent at the time, had been kidnapped in Mexico. And, for your audience, most Americans, at least my age, will recognize that name because it was in the news every single night for several weeks. But so Kiki was working at the embassy I can't remember exactly what city it was. I don't think it was Mexico City. It might have been, though, now that I think about it. But anyway, he was working a big case on a cartel as a DEA agent, and he gets kidnapped by the cartel and tortured for several days to find out, exactly what the DEA knew about him. And so this was in the news every single night. And the things that we, as a U.S. government, to a lesser extent, what DEA was doing to try to find out where Kiki was and try to recover his body. So that was the first time I'd ever really heard of DEA. And I'm like, oh man, the fact that he's down there in Mexico working cases, I'm like, wow, that sounds really, really cool. So I get back from the first Gulf War, I'm sitting around Camp Lejeune, and I found out that my unit was going to go to South Texas to help out with border operations. And as part of that workup training, a DEA agent was going to come to our unit and give us a brief on, the dangers of, drug cartels and things like that. This guy's name was Mike Grimes. I'll never forget him. To this day, he's the coolest dude I've ever met in my life. And so he was the boss of the Wilmington DEA office. And he comes walking in, and here's the sad part is, he's at the time, he's much younger than I am now, right? But I remember looking at him as a young Marine Corps lieutenant thinking, my God, this guy is freaking old as dirt. And he had gray hair, and he had it in a ponytail. I'm like, holy shit, this dude is awesome. And so after the brief, gave us a really good brief. So afterwards, I go up to him and introduce myself and tell him I'm interested, in hearing more about it. And so he invited me down to Wilmington. It was only a short hour's drive from Camp Lejeune. So I spent some time with him, went down to his office, met him, met a couple of the agents that worked for him, and just absolutely fell in love with the guys. I mean, just listening to their stories, the work, the ability to use their imagination to make things happen. Yeah, just everything about it just sounded awesome. And I tell you, man, 23 years, it far exceeded my expectations. It was everything I wanted and more.
So, and this is the killer for you. You have that chance meeting, and at that point, did you think I'm in? I'm a surety, like I'm going to get a job?
Oh, I did. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I was so damn sure that I resigned my commission in the Marine Corps, which this will mean absolutely nothing to probably everyone that's listening. But back then in the Marine Corps, as a Marine Corps officer, and even today now, hardly anybody gets what's called an active duty commission. Everybody gets a reserve commission, and you have to earn that active commission to be able to stay in as a Marine Corps officer, right? Well, I had an active commission. I could stay in as long as I wanted to. And then as long as I didn't get, caught doing something really, really stupid, I could have stayed in as long as I wanted to. It was so bad when I put in a request for a reserve commission to get out off of active duty. I had to go to my company commander, my battalion commander, my regimental commander, and explain why I wanted to get out. I mean, active duty officers officers back then were stabbing each other in the back trying to get an active commission. So, after having to go through all that, I put in for 2 weeks worth of, 30 days worth of leave, right? Because I had been told by the DEA that I was slated for a class in October of '92 to go to the academy. 2 weeks before I was supposed to go to the academy, all government hiring had come to a freeze, right? And I was told, don't call us, we'll call you when we start hiring again. So here I am with a newborn son, my daughter's barely 3 years old. My wife's looking at me like, how are we going to, pay the bills? How are we going to buy diapers? So, you look back and one of the best things that ever happened to me, I became a cop in Charlotte, North Carolina, a beat cop. And dude, it was awesome. Loved it. It was a great experience.
So talk me through that, mate, because your dream hasn't come true of joining the DEA, and then obviously you're trying to pay the bills, and you'd close one door on the Marines, and then you join to become a police officer. And did that, coming from a military background, did you find your basic training quite easy? Because I'm seeing you now, you're still a fit, very active guy. Yeah. Was that pretty straightforward for you?
Yeah, it was very straightforward. The hardest part was just, learning law, learning the processes. Yeah, but I mean, the physical fitness was easy. The firearms for the most part was very easy. I grew up with guns, so, all that came naturally. But yeah, yeah. The hardest part was, I think I went through an academy class of, probably about 25 or 30 guys, and they were all good people, don't get me wrong, but it's like, why aren't you guys as excited to be here as I am? Some of them looked at this as just a job, but I was like, oh, this is awesome. I'm going to make, I better catch every bad guy there is out there. This is going to be the safest damn city on the face of the earth. Man, those dreams were squashed really quick. But yeah, the training was good. The academy with Charlotte PD was a very, very good course.
And how long was that, mate? For how long was the training for you?
4 months. Yeah.
Oh, geez, that is wow. That blows it because over
Yeah.
here it's like 8 months. They've got 8 months that they go to the
Oh, wow.
academy. Yeah, 8 months, and it's only just been brought back into New South Wales that where I live that they actually get paid. So for a long time there, New South Wales police weren't paid. So they actually
That's
would, yeah,
insane.
yeah, they would go down to the academy for 8 months and not get paid. So and
How do you
yeah.
do that?
Mate, honestly, it's they've only just recently they had it, then they took it away, and then
Yeah.
they've just brought it back in, and it's just like it's crazy to think you've got to give 8 months of your like, and people who are a lot older, as you know, like they got mortgages, they can't do
Yes.
it, like they can't
No.
do it. So
I
yeah,
can't imagine. I mean, I could barely afford to pay my rent, going through the academy. I can't imagine not getting paid.
yeah,
Good Lord. Yeah.
that's right. So you graduate, and was that a proud moment for you too? Because now you're a sworn police officer, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a very proud moment. Only, I mean, for the most part, because I knew I was on my career path, right? I knew I had taken the right step, especially just within, a month or so of being out of the academy in the training. It just felt natural. I felt at home. I felt good with the culture. The people that I was working with were some of the greatest guys on earth. Even today, when I tell, cop stories, a lot of those stories are from the very short 3 years that I was a police officer. Foot chases, several times a week, just fun stuff. Yeah. And a little bit of dangerous stuff. I mean, I tell you, some of one of the scariest moments of my life, even today, was about 3 or 4 weeks before I left the force. I got into a big foot chase with a guy and he tried to take my gun from me. It was the first time I ever had that personal moment
Mm.
where someone tried to kill me. So yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the last, but
Yeah,
it would
right.
not be the last as we move forward through the story. But
Yeah.
and for you, do you remember your first arrest when you and your first day?
Man, it's funny you asked me. I remember my very first call, right? My very first call to service as a lone police officer. I was working midnights. I got a call for a residential alarm check. And why I remember that, I have no clue. But I can remember being all nervous and my palms sweaty, going to check out this freaking residential place. But my very first arrest was in training, while I was still doing the OJT stuff. What's it called? The TFO, training field officer process, or whatever it was called. It's funny. I don't. You think something like that would stand out, but I don't remember the very first arrest. Yeah. It's funny because I can remember the last time I put handcuffs. I remember my last time I put handcuffs on a bad guy, but I can't remember my first time. Damn,
Oh,
Adam, I wish you hadn't asked me that because that's a good one. Yeah, that's a real good one. I wish I could.
it's funny, mate, because most first responders, like police officers that I have on, go, yeah, no, I can't really remember the first one, or it was something like a shoplifter or something minor that but they're like,
Yeah,
that's a really good question, and so
yeah.
and you mentioned after 3 years, you could you have looking back now, if the DEA job hadn't come up, could you have seen yourself having a long police
Oh, yeah.
career?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
look, I love it there, man. I would have stayed there because especially with that department, it offered a ton of different job paths, career paths. Big detective bureau. There was a former Marine that was a big homicide investigator there that I got to know really well. Several SWAT guys, all the tactical dudes. Had a big narcotics section. So, of course, I fell in love with the narcotics guys. And even as a patrol officer, I got to help them out occasionally. So, yeah, yeah.
And then your dream job comes up, mate. In 1996, you joined 95. You joined
95, yeah.
95. So after that chance meeting in 92, and then finally in 1995, you get offered. And what was the process back then? Do you have to go to the academy, and is it the same process again, like becoming a police officer?
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
And how long's that? Like how
It,
long's
it
that
was
process?
another just over 4 months. Yeah, just over 4 months. And it's an in-house academy, so you stay at the facilities in Quantico, Virginia. At that time, we were co-located in the same facility that the FBI is located in. Since then, we built our own academy grounds, but it's still within the same geographical location. It's on the Marine Corps base there at Quantico, Virginia.
So
Um,
and what do they? Is it? Do you get taught all different types of like drugs or what? Like because
yeah,
you're the first DEA agent I've ever had on. So it's
yeah,
yeah. So is that the training like the and like surveillance and
right.
undercover work and all that sort of stuff?
Yep. Yes, all of the above. Everything you can think of that a DEA agent would do, you go through the scenarios and the training. You learn everything from testifying in court, how to process drugs as evidence. It's a little bit easier, honestly, as for DEA agents because we're a single mission agency, right, for the most part. And so, you don't have to, spend a ton of time, I don't know, learning how to, investigate corruption and things of that nature. But you learn everything from, tactics, how to conduct, search warrants on residents, how to conduct, high risk traffic stops. Ton of time on the range, man. I literally developed a callus on my trigger finger from pulling the trigger so many times. And that's the joke with DEA. And we do. You shoot thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds at the academy. Yeah, you learn everything from wiretaps, the legalities of them, how to process them. Yeah, I mean, it's just you learn every aspect of conducting a drug investigation, and the academy culminates with a big fictitious case at the end, and you and your academy class, work this entire case from beginning to end. You get to see the whole process and put that picture together, and you literally end it towards the end of the academy with a big trial, a mock trial, where all the guys that you arrested during this case, go to trial and they fight you with their defense attorneys, and you get to go on stand and and see what that's like and how bad it sucks to learn that you screwed up on something on a written report and you end up feeling like an idiot. It's a really good academy. I will say this, that I felt more prepared for the job after the academy than anything else I had done up until then. That's including, Marine Corps boot camp, Charlotte PD, Police Academy. I felt very prepared, when I got to my first assignment here in Alabama. Now, granted, I had a lot of experience, that backed me up with it, but still, yeah, I thought they did a really good job with the academy.
So you finish your time at the academy, mate, and you get your first posting. And for for the non like listener or who doesn't follow what the DEA does, do you work in with your is it like do you work in with your state based like
Yeah,
other agencies and work in with the local police and
right.
on like narcotics and all that sort of thing?
Yes. Yeah, and so and this is gonna play into what we're gonna talk about later as far as building relationships with Task Force 66. To be a successful DEA agent, you have to develop good relationships with your state, local, and other federal partners. If you don't have the ability to go out and do the grip and grin and, garner their trust, you're never going to work good cases. And when I say good cases, I mean multi-district cases where you're not just arresting, some local mope who's selling a $20 crack rock. You've got to be able to work that case. You make that one arrest and be able to work that case backwards, hopefully all the way back to into Mexico or Colombia or Bolivia. And so I was really good at that. Dude, I get along with everybody. As long as you want to work and have fun, man, I'll get along with you in a heartbeat. And so, yeah, I was able to, garnish those relationships, throughout the state and through other districts. So, I got to work cases from here in Podunk, Alabama, And I was able to work cases up in New York City, over in Texas, California. I've made arrests all over the country, just from sitting at my desk in Alabama.
That's all. That's just wild. So
Yeah,
networking, you got to be a good networker, essentially.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah, right. So that and in that time too, you and because how old are you at that point, Brett? What you're
In my early 30s. Yeah, so I went to the academy when I turned 30 at the academy. Yeah.
Yep. So you're living your best life, mate. Wife, two young kids, and you're
Yeah.
finally doing your dream job of what you want to do. And in that time too, you join the fast team. And for our non-military people or non who don't follow, what is the fast team?
Yeah, so by now, by the time I get to the FAST program, I'm 10 years into my career. So, I've developed a reputation among, as a hard worker. One of the guys, so I had been activated to go to Afghanistan as a Marine. And while I was in Afghanistan, I saw firsthand the relationship between drugs and the Taliban and the insurgency. One of my academy classmates was a former Navy SEAL. And so I had been overseas once with the DEA down in Bolivia and come back. So I had some overseas experience. And during that time frame, so now it's probably 2008, right? So we're a good 5, 6, 7 years into the war. The DEA develops a program called FAST, and it stands for Foreign Deployed Advisory Support Team. And the mission of the program was to go to Afghanistan, pair up with special forces units, and target, some of the highest profile drug dealers in Afghanistan. Because all of our intelligence was telling us that about a third of the proceeds that, the insurgency was using to conduct operations against ISAF forces were coming from the drug trade. And so they felt like they, being ISAF, needed, some subject matter experts assigned with military forces to go after these personnel. And I tell you, it worked great. It worked really well. I think it's been one of the highlights of the campaign that hasn't really been talked about a lot because we had a lot of success with it.
Well, we'll touch on your deployments in a minute, but what I want to do is
Sure.
just go back a
Okay.
second to September 11, mate. I ask every veteran or every first responder that I've had on where they were on that day, and for you, this was in your home country, and where were you on that day? And for you, like this was a personal attack to your country, and what do you remember of that day?
Oh my God. So we were actually living in Bolivia. I mean, I like, I loved your comment about, this was your country. So my wife and kids and I were living in Bolivia. So at the time I was doing a 1 week on, 1 week off rotation. I was working in a jungle rotation group. So we would go out to a jungle post and work, and then I'd come home for a week. Luckily, I was at home that week, and my wife and I were out just doing something. I have no idea what. We were just out in town, enjoying the week. And my dad called me on the cell phone and was like, "Hey, have you seen the news? We're under attack." I'm like, "The hell are you talking about?" And so my wife and I immediately go to the DEA office, and obviously they had the news on. Everybody standing around TV, just like everyone here in the country, and just got that sickening feeling, watching what happened. And but to your point, being in your country, for both of us, for both my wife and I, we were like, being in Bolivia just felt awful. Like we wanted to come home so bad, to be back here with our fellow Americans at the time. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, we both remember that day vividly,
Mm.
like
Oh,
everyone else.
mate, I do as well, and I was
Sure,
eight. I was eight, Brett, and honestly, I thought it was a movie. I thought
sure.
I turned on the TV, expecting to watch my kids' TV, like watching kids' programs before I went to school, and I was eight at the time, and I'm like, oh, this is a cool movie, and then the next channel, and I was like, oh, okay, and it wasn't back then. It wasn't until I started seeing the people jump out of the buildings that I went, oh, this is not and
Right.
being 8 years old, you're a kid, you don't know the gravity of what what has happened. And
Right.
it was then that I went, oh my God, there's people actually jumping out of buildings. This is not a movie. This is real life. And that day changed the world. And for you looking back then, and did you think that you would be involved in your longest war ever going forward from that day?
You know, obviously, no, that day I didn't have the foresight, but I tell you, soon thereafter I did. I knew it was going to be a long time. The Marine Corps actually ended up activating me while I was in in Bolivia. And so, I had to move my wife and kids back into the States, back here to Alabama. And within, I don't know, probably I guess it was yeah, it was. It was the day after my household goods arrived from Bolivia back into our new home. The day after, boxes are stacked to the ceiling. I left to go to Camp Lejeune to go to Afghanistan. So this was 2003. So that was my first trip to Afghanistan was with the Marine Corps.
Yeah,
And
right.
yeah, so while we were there, obviously Iraq kicks off.
Yep.
And I can remember all of us standing around talking. And when I say all of us, there were probably, 4 or 5 other Marine Corps officers. And by then I had been in country 3 or 4 months. And I knew then, we all knew then, that we would be in Afghanistan long after Iraq. The place was just an absolute shit show. And when I say that, I mean the Afghans. We knew that they would never, ever be able to run the country themselves, to be able to protect themselves. And that was in 2003. So you can just
Yeah.
imagine the anger that I get when I see these politicians and senior executive officers spout, what they said about Afghanistan throughout the years. So
And for that, then as well, because at that point too, like you back with the Marines, and your first deployment was there in 2003. Was there talk of the DEA going in at that point, or was it simply the mission
no,
focus was to get to basically take Al Qaeda on, and was that the mission profile back then?
yeah, it was just go toe to toe with them, find them and kill them. But it was, so the position that I was in, it gave me access to some of the classified reports that special forces units were putting out and things like that. And it was pretty obvious that there was a ton of drugs that were being moved throughout the country. And so I ended up writing, as a Marine Corps officer, ended up writing a white paper, as we refer to it, saying that, hey, we need to get DEA agents over here, and they need to be working alongside our military, and we also need DEA intel analysts here. And again, this is 2003. I'm hating life. I don't like what I'm doing in Afghanistan because I'm sitting at a computer all day long. Had come in from Bolivia, where I'm doing patrols in the jungle alongside Bolivian cops, having a blast. To come to a war zone in a Marine Corps uniform, sitting at a computer every day. I mean, I was miserable. So I wrote this paper thinking, maybe something will happen, maybe not. I know some folks at DEA headquarters saw it. To this day, I have no idea if it had any impetus as developing the FAST program. I like to think in my head maybe it did, but who knows? I doubt it. I doubt it. I literally I can see some dude sitting at a desk in headquarters, balling it out and throwing it away. But the guy who ended up putting the program together, FAST, had been involved in a DEA operation from years ago that was referred to as Snowcap. And the Snowcap was very similar to what FAST ended up being, but to a much lesser degree.
Mm.
Snowcap was, hey, let's find some former military guys, let's send them to South America, and let's let them work with the South American cops to find the drug labs and stuff like that. So it was very paramilitary focused, much like the FAST program. So yeah, so I come back, for my first deployment as a Marine, get back into my DEA role. I'm working cases again. A buddy of mine who had been the former Navy SEAL calls me. He goes, "Hey, dude, we started the FAST program. I just finished my first deployment to Afghanistan with the FAST, and now it's 2008." He goes, "You got to come." I'm like, "Screw that. I'm done. I'm done with Afghanistan. I want nothing to do with it." He goes, "No, I promise you, it's nothing like being in the military. We've got free reign. We can work with who we want to. We can use our own imagination. I'm telling you, we're getting shit done." And so here I was, working in Montgomery, Alabama. I was the big fish in the little pond, so to speak. Had great cases going on. I was working wiretaps. I remember going home telling my wife, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And, like every other time, she's like, hey, if you want it, let's do it. And she gave me the go ahead. And so I started, training, getting ready for the program. And 2009, I was able to, join the program.
So, and then this is where you joined in 2009, and then 2010, your first deployment as part of the FAST team. And for people like our non-military people, and I've had a lot of veterans on speaking about this, the mission profile, what was, so I know that Afghanistan is a massive producer of narcotics, and so what was happening, Brett, with that sense of that the Taliban were starting to use the profits from the drugs, and that this is my understanding. So they were using the profits from the drugs to then fund their training to fight the war. Is that how it was working?
Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, absolutely. It was estimated that about a third of their funding came from narcotics. Yeah, oddly enough, heroin, Afghan heroin typically doesn't end up in the U.S. It usually goes to Europe. And I think you guys actually get quite a bit of it too. But yeah, I mean that's about a third of their funding, and so we paired up with special forces units, and our intel analysts sat right next to all the military CIA analysts. And anytime information related to drugs would come across their desk, they would feed it to the team leader of the FAST program and determine whether or not this was a viable target to go after. So that's how we ended up, picking our targets basically.
And was that province by province, or was it mainly, were there more provinces that were more like you'd target the different provinces according to the intel that came in?
Well, all of our intel analysts sat in locations that gave them situational awareness throughout the country, but obviously there were provinces that had more viable targets than others, especially in the South. I mean, that's where the majority of the heroin was being produced. Helmand Province,
Yep.
Uruzgan, Kandahar. So, I mean, that's where typically all the FAST teams would end up. We're in the South, but
Yeah, I know I've had a lot of 2 Commando, which you will get to Task Force 66 shortly, and they said that they did a lot of missions with you guys in the Helmand province. And one of my good veteran mates, who unfortunately was tragically killed in 2023 on his motorbike over in the US, he was over there and he said that Helmand was just that was their heartland. That was where they were. It was just the Badlands of, they were fanatical fighters, and as you know, because you were on the ground there, and so that happens, mate. Your first deployment, and is that a kinetic? Is that the first deployment is kinetic?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. Yeah. So the first deployment, 2010, got there in January of 2010. It was freezing cold, and we ended up bouncing around working with several units. And so this kind of goes to the Task Force 66 portion of our story that we'll get to. But so I'm there as a team member. One of my best friends is the team leader, the former Navy SEAL that I've spoke to. His name is Rich. And I noticed that, every time we would work with a different unit, there was always this 3 or 4 day lag time that would take us, to get to know each other, to make sure they could trust us, we could trust them. And, we weren't just a bunch of street cops, just here playing Army. You know what I mean? Like, we were actually trained and we could do our job pretty well. And it was so aggravating, having to bounce around to develop these relationships over and over again. But yeah, it was very kinetic. I can remember just the most bizarre, surreal moment was in Marja. So, we had 2 big battles in Marja. I think this was probably the second one, if I remember right. The times escape me at the moment, but this was, February 2010, because my team leader ended up getting shot on Valentine's Day. So we ended up going into Marja in February, and me and one other guy had been split off from the team. So the team's made up of 9 special agents, right? And so me and one other guy were cut off, and we went with, and I can't remember which SF unit it was, but they were based out of Helmand Province at Camp Leatherneck in Helmand Province, so where the Marines were. But this Army SF unit was based there. We were cut off to go be assigned to them. So me and a guy named Frank are there with this one SF unit. The rest of the team is going to be inserted in a different location in the Marja with another SF unit. And Marja was used as a transshipment area for heroin. I knew there was a big market there that, the Taliban would, to go there to, make deals with where heroin would be sent in, whether it was going to Iran or different locations. And so that's why we were there, because it had a huge drug nexus. And so we ended up inserting in the night, I want to say like probably around the 12th. Yeah, a couple of days before Valentine's Day of February. We go in that night. It's midnight and it's kinetic the moment we get off the helicopters. I was in the rear. Oh, and let me back up. So, and we had a Navy sniper, Navy SEAL sniper assigned to this SF unit, right? So he was going to help provide overwatch. This is honest to God truth. May lightning strike me. We're standing on the pickup zone prior to loading the helicopters to go infill into Marja. And the team sergeant comes and says, hey, this Navy SEAL sniper's overwatch, his teammate, had gotten deadly sick the night before and could not go on this op. Is there anyone willing to volunteer to go with the Navy sniper, Navy SEAL sniper? I'm like, fuck yeah, I'll go. So my DEA buddy looks at me like, are you freaking kidding me? And so he and I split up. He ends up going with one team into Marja, and I go with a separate team into Marja. And I'm assigned to the Navy SEAL sniper. And so the next morning, we make our infill, Marine Corps helicopters are flying over, firing off Hellfire missiles. There's firing going on as we're making our way into the target. And I'm thinking, man, this is so freaking surreal. I'm a DEA agent now. I'm not a Marine. I'm here I'm following a Navy SEAL sniper with these Army SF guys. I'm like, this is just so bizarre. And so we make our way to the target. We get set up on the top of the one and only 3-story building in Marja. So everybody in Marja can see this freaking building, and they can see these two Americans on top of the building. So we're getting shot at from everywhere. And so for 2 days straight, I'm on top of this building with a Navy SEAL sniper. And then the second morning we're there, I can't remember which Marine Corps unit, but we are there. So this is kind of the moral of the story and the surrealness of it, right? The second morning we're there, and we're there to provide we're a blocking force for the Marines as they make their way into Marja. And I remember looking over my shoulder on top of this 3-story building, watching the convoy of Marines make their way in. And I'm thinking, I'm here as a DEA agent providing blocking as a blocking team for the Marines as they come in, right? It was just so surreal, being there and this all happening. So
that happens, mate. And as you say, it's a real moment because you've got such a history to the Marines, and
right.
and now you're providing Overwatch to them to assault.
As a civilian, basically, I'm a civilian, so it was just weird. Yeah.
That's wild, and so. You have your first trip, you come back, and then you're promoted to, now you're a team leader, and as you know, being a team leader, it can be a lonely road. And what was that like for you now that you've stepped up, you're now a team leader, and you mentally have to change the way you think? It's not just about you anymore. You've got a team that you've got to lead, and then you start to, this is ramping up, then you deploy again in 2011, and same mission profile as the year before that you'd been in, but this time now as a team leader, a little bit different in the mindset of approaching your missions.
Right. Yeah. So now it's 2011. My best friend at the time, who was the Navy SEAL team leader, had gotten promoted, and now he's over the entire program. I take his spot. I'm now the team leader for Bravo team. And had 8 of the best freaking DEA agents I've ever worked with, just awesome dudes. We go back into Afghanistan. And so now this is kind of gets to the point about bouncing around, right? I had told the team that my goal was to find a unit that would travel, throughout the southern part of Afghanistan and work with us and stick with us, right? I mean, that was my goal. I wanted to find one unit and stay with them the entire 4 month deployment. I told them, I said, I want to do more deployments, I mean, more missions than any other team had ever done. And if we can find, that type of unit to stick with, we can make it happen. Because we just don't have the expertise to be able to, to call for fire, to call in close air support. We have very basic training in all those different things, but having a medic there, you name it, right? Plus just boots on the ground. Well, we got to have additional help. 8 guys ain't going to get it in Afghanistan. And so, I mean, just a quirk of luck, right? Still to this day, a guy named John Manna was in the Chow Hall in Kandahar, literally within like the first week of us being in country, and runs into a dude named Ray. And I won't use his last name because he's still swinging the bat. He was the operations officer for Task Force 66. And he had heard about us during one of his other deployments, right? Heard about some of the missions we were working. And so he and John get to talking and says, basically what I had said, hey, we're looking for somebody to pair with. And he goes, well, hell yeah, man, come on. I'll introduce you to my team leader. So I meet Ray, and dude, it was love at first sight. I mean, and again, just the coolest dude I've ever met. Just, no BS. We both just wanted to get the job done, wanted to go after bad guys, make shit happen. He invites us up to Taron Cot to meet the leadership. And I'm telling you, like, the guys and we would have walked there. We were so excited about getting to work with Task Force 66. Within, golly, less than 3 weeks later, we're out doing our first mission. We spend several days practicing, doing rehearsals, figuring out exactly how we're going to do tactics, how we're going to, mash the teams together. And less than 3 weeks later, we're out, kicking indoors. And it was balls to the wall after that, man. It was just one mission after another.
And I've had a lot of the two commando guys on that were with over there, and this is where it started to ramp up, and you're working with all the different companies and the missions, and they talk about it as that was the funnest time working with you guys, just kicking doors in, blowing shit up, and just causing havoc, and that's what you were doing, and
yeah. And I think, real quick, if I could, because look, he'll never listen to this, but I have to give him credit. So my team leader, the former Navy SEAL, takes a ton of credit for this as well, because in his position as the program leader, he came back into country with me and basically stayed in Kabul, and he was able to campaign basically to ISAF leadership that drug operations need to take on a higher profile. And he was able to do that. And so that gave me the ability to build a relationship with Task Force 66 like we did, and conduct as many missions as we did. Because without his ability to give me that type of cover, it would have never happened as well. So, and then obviously without Task Force 66 willingness to take us in, yeah, it was just, man, it ramped up, and boy, it didn't slow down at all.
And during this time, mate, you didn't come through unscathed, and I know there's a few other DEA agents that didn't come through unscathed as well, and you were shot in your ass. And what was happening on this day, mate, for you to get shot?
Yeah, so we had landed at a small village called Paik up in the northern part of Helmand province. I got to tell you this story too. So my best friend, John Manna, and I are in Helmand at Camp Leatherneck. And we had gone there with a couple of the Aussies from Task Force 66 to brief the Marines on this mission that we were going to go on, right? To tell them, explain how the heroin trade was operating in northern Helmand province. And we're sitting in the operations briefing room at Helmand's province, or at Camp Leatherneck. And we're waiting for the leadership to come in, and they had this huge map on the wall. And on the map, in the very top of Helmand province, they had these red slashes that went through the entire part of that province, right? And we're sitting there, the major walks in, and John looks over at the major and he goes, hey, why is that part of Helmand province, why do they have the red slashes through it? And the guy goes, I swear to God, he goes, oh, that's no man's land. We don't go to that area. And we look at each other, and we look at the major, and we go, yeah, we're going there next week.
Oh,
The guy just shakes his head. And so anyway, we had gone to Peck Village to use as a lily pad, right? So we were going to be the DEA guys and our counterparts, our Afghan counterparts, were going to be the maneuvering force through this one village that was going to be just to the south of Peck Village. Because of the distance from Tarancot, they had to refuel between each insertion. And we had just enough to make, we had to do two insertions, right? So in order to put a blocking force in before the maneuvering force went in, we had to go out to a lily pad. Our group had to wait somewhere while they went back, picked up the blocking force, and insert them into the main target. Well, we had very little intel on Peck Village, the lily pad, right? While we were being inserted into Peck Village, literally as we fly over the village, we see a huge jingle truck, which is nothing more than a dump truck, filled to the gills with opium. 4 or 5 guys on motorcycles standing around, sitting around looking at the dump truck and then watching us fly over as we get ready to insert, to land. And they immediately take off on their motorcycles. And we're all looking at each other, watching this happen on the ground like, holy crap, what are we fixing to walk into? And I'm telling you, man, we land, we get off the helicopters, we walk into the village. As we're walking into the village, one of the 66 guys gets on the radio and goes, hey, look north. We all look north and we see women and children leaving the village. And to this day, I can feel the hair on my arm stand up because we all know what's about to happen. In less than 20 minutes, it being in the village was the first round. And once it started, it didn't stop until after we left.
and I know that a lot of the guys I've spoken to as well, mate, have said the same thing, that was a key indication that you were going to have gunfights is when the women and children would leave the villages, and and so that happens. And are you shot in that first 20 minutes, or what happens?
No, yeah, it wasn't until so during the village, during the clearing of the village, we found everything you can think of, a ton of heroin, opium, like hundreds and hundreds of feet of det cord. We found these low metallic claymore mines, or mines rather, anti-personnel mines. Blew it all up. We found a money link, where they were transferring money, a halal, yeah, where money is transferred. So this was a very important village, unbeknownst to us. And so we were getting shot at from 3 different directions. And it was so bad that in order to get to our main target, right, we had to get, the helicopter to come back and pick us up. We had to come up with a safe landing zone, for the helos to come in and pick us up. And so we found the way the village was laid out, we were able to use 2 large sections of the bazaar to land in. And so, we would use these buildings as kind of a protective measure. They were landed between the 2 buildings, pick a load up and then fly off. And so we had to bring them in one at a time. We had 4 helicopters. So the first 3 come in, no problems. They're shooting at us, but nothing effective. Well, I had gotten all the DEA agents and all the Afghan counterparts off on the first one. So now it's the 4th one. That's just me and the Task Force 66 guys waiting to take off. And as the helicopter comes in to pick us up, he screwed up his approach, right? And it's super hot. And so these helicopters have a hard time operating in such a high altitude, hot weather. And when he tries to flare, he just can't quite get the flare right. And he passes over the safe landing zone and ends up landing out in the middle of the open field, which exposes us to everybody. And so, I can remember that feeling like, oh, Jesus, this is awful. And we all knew it, but we're all laughing about it because there's nothing else we can do. It's not like we can stay here. We got to go, right? Because we can't, So anyway, we make our way out to the helicopter, and it's just like bees, buzzing by. Rounds are passing us. You can hear the snaps, and, we're doing the best we can, trying to put down, some suppressive fire. And I make my way up to the helicopter, and I'm kneeling down, providing some covering fire as some of the other guys are getting on behind me. And there's literally 4 of us kneeling down right next to each other. And I was the second guy in the row. Ray, the guy who's my buddy who started the whole, relationship, kneeling right next to me. And something told me to stand up and get on the freaking helicopter, right? It's time to get on the helicopter. So I stand up And as I turn, and this is important, right? As I turned to get on is when I got hit in the butt, and it comes out my hip. If I had stayed in that position, in a kneeling position, the round would have hit me right here, and I had zero protection. And I mean that's a death shot right there. You don't recover from that.
Mm.
But something just told me to stand up, right? I stood up, turned, and that's when it hit me. Yeah, it knocked my feet out from under me. Like I wasn't on the ground a split second, and the guys are grabbing me, throwing me on the helicopter. I barely had a chance to even try to stand up. And then we're taking off and taking rounds into the side of the helicopter. And this is another interesting note. A friend of mine was flying that helicopter. He lives probably 20 minutes from me now. And talk about how random is that, right?
Wow.
Yeah, we didn't know each other back then. I mean, we got to know each other because he came to me to apologize. Hey, man, I'm sorry I missed the LZ. I'm sorry I got you shot. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me, dude? That's some of the best flying I've ever seen. I mean, the fact that they were able to maintain the composure that they had to get that helicopter off the ground while rounds are coming into their freaking canopy, it was just absolutely amazing. I mean, we should have all died that day. And he was able to get us off the ground and get us out of there. So,
and that, as you say, mate, it's just lucky that you got it's like bullets flying everywhere. It's lucky that any of yous got out that day, and only you copped that being shot in the ass. But as you say, just something that day for you to stand up, mate.
Right.
Whether it was a hand of God or something, to, as you say, because you were kneeling down. It was, if you had been where you were, like, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Oh, 100%. I mean, look, I'll tell you, I've felt his presence on many occasions, and that was definitely one of them. So, yeah.
And,
I mean,
and what do they do? Do they fly you back, and so you're obviously getting treated on the bird as you're coming back in? And do they medevac you out to what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, the door, there was literally, the task force's surgeon was the guy right next to me, was 3 dudes down. So, if you're going to get shot, this is the place to do it. One is it's the best place on the body to get shot is in your butt because there's nothing but muscle there, right? Or fat in my case at this point. Plus I got a surgeon right next to me who's looking after me. So I mean, and then with all these bad dudes, Task Force 66 looking after me. Yeah, you couldn't have asked for better care. So yes, to answer your question, we went to the site. We went to our main target to make the infill, and the doc was like, "Hey, we need to make sure everything's okay with Brett." And so I had to stay on the helicopter along with one other Task Force 66 member who escorted me back to Tarancot. But here's the moral of this story is that the main target ended up being worse than Pake Village was. I mean, they were in a shootout the moment they got off the helicopter and started making their way into the village. And and sadly, a young operator was killed there, Rowan. I think Rowan Robinson.
Yeah, Rowan Robertson. Yep.
Yeah, great young man. I just barely gotten to know him. I think he was at the time maybe a year or two older than my kids, and so it was a kick in the gut, man. It was a bad kick in the gut.
It's I know. So the veteran friend who I told you about, who tragically was killed over in the US a couple of years ago, he was actually on that. He was over there at the time. So when Rome was killed, so it's all starting to intertwine, and it's funny how, well, it's not funny, but it's amazing how these stories are all starting to, with all the different podcasts that I've done, that he was over there at that time when Rome was hit. So that happens, and then how are you traveling mentally, mate, at this point? Like, you've just been shot, and you're in kinetic deployments. This is everything that you've always wanted and more. How are you traveling mentally at this point?
Oh, I'm on hog heaven, man. It's awesome. It's hard to explain, Adam. And I think we've had this conversation. I think we talked about this a little bit, and I've had the same conversation with other guys. Is that you feel so guilty for being there, right? Because you've got a wife and 2 kids back home. She's worried to death. I can remember just dreading having to call my wife to tell her, about getting shot. All you want to do is get home to them. And then the moment you get home to them, all you want to do is get back, because you feel guilty because you've still got friends and, you still got, soldiers that, you want to serve with that are, still in the suck. So it's just an odd dichotomy, right? Going back and forth constantly, but it felt natural. Like I knew I was doing the right thing. I knew I was doing what I should be doing, and I was working with the absolute best people on the face of the earth. So, I mean, mentally, I was fine. Yeah, I was good. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was scared shitless half the time too. But anyone that says they weren't scared, during a shootout is either a psychopath or just lying.
Yeah.
And I freely admit, yeah, there's yeah, there were several times where I'm like, oh my God, I think I may have gotten in over my head on this one. But yeah, I was in a good spot mentally. Yeah.
It's interesting because a lot of the veterans I've spoken to, mate, say it's like a drug. It's a drug that you chase.
Sure.
That you're chasing that adrenaline, and when you're young, you think you're bulletproof. So but
Yeah.
things are starting to stack up. You're starting to see, you're losing guys, and as you say, you're not bulletproof because, well, you're definitely
Right.
not bulletproof because you copped a bullet in the ass, and
Sure.
so
Yeah.
so and that's what they've said, that it is like a drug that you when you're home you want to be back over there, but when you're over there you want to be home, and
Sure.
you're chasing that high, and so that happens. You rehabilitate, and then you deploy, and this is where we start. This is where Heston comes into it, and we're
Right.
talking about Heston Russell, and you're working with November Platoon in 2012, mate, and this deployment it was highly kinetic, and I've actually just had one of the guys who you worked alongside with. His podcast has just come out, and he was he was under Heston, and mate, what was that like working with November Platoon? And they've just recently come into the media spotlight, and as you know, with poor old
Uh,
Heston, and mate, what was that like working with November Platoon?
it was good. Yeah, it was real good. I loved them. They were great guys. Yeah. So the fast teams would deploy for 4 months. As a team leader, you were there for, almost for close to 5 months. Then you would go home for a year and then go, do your next deployment. And so 2012 comes around. Our 2011 deployment was so good that most of the fast teams went straight to Task Force 66, basically did the same thing that we had done. And so, we stayed in contact with the guys throughout 11, early 12, getting ready to deploy. And, obviously, as soon as we get there in 2012, we make a beeline back to Cot and kick things off. But within the first 3 or 4 weeks, we had done a few missions with them, and things went great. Loved working with November. And why? I never can remember the other team or the other platoon, Oscar
Oscar
platoon.
Platoon, yeah, Oscar
Yeah,
Platoon, yep.
yeah, and I never can remember the platoon commander. But anyway, we were closer in age, right? And so anyway, the point is, we bounced back and forth between the platoons, right? During 2011, we had stayed with the same group, the same time, the same ground force was the same every time. 2012, we'd gone back and forth with each platoon, and I didn't like it. I don't like bouncing around. TTPs were just slightly different. Don't get me wrong, communication was a little different. And so, within the first couple of weeks, I'm like, all right, look, I don't like this. It's not like it was in 2011. I want to stick with one team. I know you guys have, a ton of missions that you're going to want to do that aren't within the drug realm, that don't have a drug nexus, that we're probably not going to be able to assist you with. So if we could, I went to leadership and I said, if we could, I'd like to stick with one platoon to do these drug nexus missions and not bounce back and forth. And so the decision was made to make Oscar platoon that drug nexus platoon. And so that's how that happened. That's how we ended up not working with November and working with Oscar.
Mm.
I think there was a lot made up about why we didn't work with November.
Yep.
But it couldn't be further from the truth, because Heston and I had a great relationship.
Mm.
I was super impressed with the guy. If there's any reason why I didn't want to work with him, it's because I was freaking jealous about how damn young and in good shape he was, and it pissed me off, right? I wanted somebody that was a little less, high speed and closer to my age that I wanted to deal with. And so, yeah, that's how all that happened. And it was a great deployment. Yeah, it was a really good deployment.
And I wanted to highlight that, mate, because, and like Heston's a great guy, and that's the thing that, it's been a thing that's been in Australia where the media are just, they're trying to chase things that never happened, and
Right.
and it's like, even you had your comments changed and chopped up for
Sure.
for reasons only known to the people, and
Right.
it's just to create a story that is not, it was never there.
Right. Right. And the fact that that guy is still working as a journalist, much less still working for ABC, just blows my mind.
I can't fathom it, mate. It
Yeah.
honestly, it's, and yeah, I'll bite my tongue because I might end up getting myself sued, so I'll bite my tongue. But yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to highlight that, mate, because as you said, Heston, from your own words, and we've spoken off air, was just a great guy, cared about his guys, and was all about, the mission focused, and he was good at his job.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, the fact that he's been able to, to fight the system the way he did is just so impressive. There's very few people that would have had the intellect to know how to fight them, right?
Mm,
And then have the intestinal fortitude to follow through with it.
mm,
Because, I mean, not that there was any evidence, because there's zero evidence as far as I'm concerned, but with one wrong step, with one bad lawyer to help him with, it could have easily went sideways and him lost and looked bad, and then no one would have ever known the truth,
mm,
right? So the fact that he was able to follow through with it the way he did is just so impressive. Yeah.
mm. Absolutely, and I think it's set a precedent going forward, which is good,
Right.
that, not to, that stop trying to find things that were never there. So
Exactly.
that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's it. And so you work alongside, Task Force 66, and then you work finally with the US Marines in your final operation over there. And
Yeah.
is that still, you're still doing the same thing, still targeting all those
Yep.
sort of things?
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yeah. So I knew this was going to be my last deployment, right? Because my wife and I had talked. I'm like, I was getting close to the end of my tour with FAST. If I was going to promote again with DEA, I needed to get back out into the field and do the real work, the normal work with DEA. So I knew this was going to be my last deployment. I mean, after, now this is like my sixth, combat deployment between DEA and the Marine Corps. I felt like I definitely owed it to my wife, to be done with it. And so we had gotten a request from the Marine Corps to go out west of Afghanistan to do some missions with MARSOC, Marine Special Operations Command. And so I took one other DEA agent with me, and obviously, being the former Marine, I was like, this is going to be cool. I want to go do my last few missions with the Marine Corps. And God Almighty, it's just one of those weird things. Like, the good Lord couldn't have given me, better missions to do on my last three or four missions. I mean, it was just phenomenal. We ended up kicking in a compound and seizing the most heroin that anyone had ever seized up until that point, and got into one of the most hellacious firefights I'd ever been involved in. As I'm down in a hole digging out some heroin that had been hidden, we got ambushed with a PKM that, just like, I'm down on the ground digging out a hole, and above me along the wall that I'm digging in front of is just getting peppered. And I'm trying to bury myself into this hole to get away from the rounds. The Marines were running, trying to get behind the wall, and it was just, yeah, it was crazy, crazy, crazy operation. And that was the very last operation, the very last one I ever did.
Wow.
Most heroin we ever seized, huge firefight. I did it with the Marines.
Yep.
It was great. Yeah.
Did you feel, again, mate, a sense of God being with you that day?
100%. Yeah. It was like, you did good. You were doing the right thing. Just, yeah, yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So,
Yeah.
so you come back from that mission, mate, and then what's happening in the next part of your career moving forward? So, as you said, you're not deploying anymore, and what's happening for you back now that you're back home? Well, well, safe-ish as you
Yeah.
can be back in the
Oh,
US.
no, no.
Yeah, back with
Yeah,
your
no,
wife
but
and
I was about as safe as anybody could be with, especially with DEA, because I went from that, in Afghanistan, getting shot at, working with MARSOC, Task Force 66, to Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm working with a group that does nothing but investigate doctors.
oh, oh no.
Imagine the most addicted heroin addict, you can imagine, all of a sudden like smoking a Marlboro, or something like that. Like, man, this ain't gonna get it. It was awful. As it turned out, professionally, it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me
Mm,
because I learned how to work, a variety of investigations. The whole MO on working a doctor was so totally different than working like normal street drugs.
mm.
So professionally, it was extremely important to me. It was really good that I did it, and yeah, I did that for about 2 years. Was very successful. My group was awesome. I had a guy that so in DEA you have special agents and then you have other investigators who don't carry guns and don't have arrest authority, but they're referred to as diversion investigators, and that's all they do is work, pharmaceutical type drug cases. But anyway, he was basically a mentor to me. He helped me work these cases, helped me run the group that I was in charge of, and was just super, super successful. And I learned a ton from a guy named Justin Wood. And I hope, he's in a leadership position at DEA headquarters now. And hopefully he'll continue to climb the ranks because the guy was just phenomenal. And so I was able to do such a good job. And I say that for a reason. I was able to do such a good job at that position is that I was able to go back to the FAST program and run the whole program. And so I got another promotion from there to go back to FAST, for just over a year to run the program. And so that was,
Oh, so full
yeah,
circle from going from
oh,
being an operator to now implementing the training.
yeah, team member, team leader to then running the program. Yeah, it was really cool. It was awesome.
And then so that happens, mate, and then in 2018, after 23 years of working with the DEA, having the best career, you retire from the DEA. And what what was that like for you? Because that's all you'd known for 23 years. And did you feel that you had lost a bit of your sense of purpose, or
Oh,
what was happening then?
yeah, yeah. It was much worse than when I had left the Marine Corps, 20 something years earlier. I can remember my last day, at Camp Lejeune on active duty, feeling like I was just deserting, the Marines and feeling like I was, about to lose my identity. And it kind of felt like that for a few days until I became a cop. But this was 10 times worse. I knew I had reached the point in DEA where, I wasn't going to go any further. I didn't have any desire to become an executive leader. There just weren't any of the jobs that were available that appealed to me. And, at least for us as cops, you've got to retire and get another job to kind of reach that point of financial stability that, everybody strives for, right? Because that's one of the great things about being an agent is that you, at a certain age, at a fairly young age, in your 50s, you can start drawing your retirement. And so there's some financial incentive to leave the agency as well. So you can get another job and start, at least saving a little bit, finally. But yes, to your point, I had no clue. Well, maybe I did, but anyway, just how wrapped up my identity was as a DEA agent. Like my life just seemed to revolve in it. And within a few months, I had started second guessing myself on every decision I'd ever made about leaving. I mean, I wanted back so bad. But now I'm over it and now I'm past it. But man, I did. I went through a good year's worth of just depression and just, anxiety. I had my very first anxiety attack, probably a good year and a half after I left the agency. I can remember my damn chest just pounding. I was dealing with a bunch of civilians and some attorneys in this corporation that I was working for, and just knowing I didn't belong. I was just in a wrong. I had no business being here. Yeah, yeah. It took me a long time to get over it. Right.
And And also too, mate, what wouldn't have helped was COVID when so you're
Oh,
dealing with
yeah.
you're dealing with the loss of your identity of 23 years, and then as you said, that finding that purpose again was very hard too, because during COVID everything was locked down, the world went into absolute, it just went crazy into lockdowns, and so that would have been hard too.
Sure. Yeah, it was awful. Yeah.
And then, so for you now, mate, looking like, as we mentioned at the start of the podcast, and we've only got a couple more questions, and then we'll finish up. And mate, it's just been an absolute epic story to get you on and share your story and where it was to having that dream to join. And we talked about September 11. When that anniversary rolls around each year, how do you like look at it now? Is it still as important today from when it happened in 2001?
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, it is to me, and it is to my family. It's not something we sit around and talk about, but I mean, it's obvious every September the 11th. I just worry that to our nation, it's not as important as it was then. And I'm worried to death that, the historical value and the lessons that should have been learned won't be applied in the future. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I worry to death. It just seems like, the mistakes that we made in Afghanistan, not getting out sooner, not getting out in a manner, that from a position of strength
Mm.
that we should have. Yeah, I just worry to death that, that we didn't learn all the lessons that we should have learned. Right.
Well, you just mentioned Afghanistan, mate, and taking the fight, to
Mhm.
Al Qaeda and the Taliban, with how we did leave, and looking at it now, it was an absolute failure.
100%. Yeah.
The whole, and I ask this question a lot, and I know it's a loaded question to a lot of veterans, and especially for you as well, being that this happened to your country. But looking at it now, mate, was it all worth it? Like, looking back on what's happened.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it was definitely worth it. 100%. Yeah. You can't take away the accomplishments of all the individuals, that deployed to Afghanistan. All of those accomplishments, the battles that we won, the relationships that we developed, even with the Afghans, with a handful of really honorable men and women, that helped us, throughout that mission. It's a shame that we weren't able to, do more for them. But yeah, I mean, that's such a loaded question. It
Mm.
wasn't worth it. Yeah, it would be hard to tell the family members of those who have fallen that it was worth it for sure.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, yeah, that's a very loaded question. I don't have a
Yeah,
100% good answer for you.
and
Yeah,
no, and mate, thank you for, because I ask that a lot, and I know it is a loaded question to
sure.
ask, and
Yeah.
and I only ask that because I know you've had boots on the ground, so you can talk from your lived experience, and a lot of veterans that I do talk to say no, it was worth it, because we gave the Afghan people 20 years of free reign from they went to school, they got education, they went to university, they got to live, a semi-normal life to what they'd had previously and what they've now got again, which is, under terrorist, under the bloody, Taliban rule again. So it is a loaded question, and I thank you for answering that, mate, the best way you can. So, mate, what advice can you give to any young person, especially a young American who listens to this, who's thinking of going and having a career in the DEA?
Oh man, get ready. Yeah, it's an awesome job. I mean, yeah, I try to act as a recruiter every chance I get, talking to former military guys or, young college students who are thinking about, the law enforcement career. One of the things I tell them, what do you want to do? I mean, do you want the excitement? Do you want the adrenaline rushes? Do you want the ability to use your imagination and your initiative to make things happen? It's a very decentralized agency because it has to be because of the nature of drug investigations. and not to knock the FBI, which I'm more than happy to do at any moment. But they're a huge bureaucracy, but the types of investigations they conduct requires it to be so, right? And when you're doing counter narcotic or counter espionage type investigations, corruption cases, those types of investigations take a certain amount of oversight. There has to be a much larger strategic view of things, right?
Mm.
So because of the nature of those types of investigations, they have a ton of oversight. All of their agents are, they've got a thumb on them, for the majority of their career. As a DEA agent, I mean, as a second year agent, dude, you're on the street running investigations, and you've got an entire group, doing everything you say, right? You're assigning surveillance, you're assigning, tactical people to a search warrant, you're, writing affidavits for, either a search warrant or a wiretap, you name it. So yeah, I try to put it in those texts, in that type of character. So some people aren't ready for that type of freedom, right? And believe me, when I say freedom, I say that for a reason, because DEA gives you a ton of rope, and I've seen a lot of people hang themselves with it. Yeah, they teach you in the academy. There's two things that'll get you fired here, and that's money and that's women, right? And I've seen a ton of agents that just because of the freedom they have, they make bad choices, and they either they do something wrong with the money, or they end up going astray with a woman, or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah,
it
definitely, mate. Young men, yeah.
exactly right.
Very,
So
very on the stray, mate.
right,
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. So,
I think.
yeah, sorry, mate. Continue.
Oh, no, no, no. Look, I'm super lucky. I mean, between the Marine Corps and the DEA, it's probably the two worst careers that any marriage could ever survive. Like,
Yeah.
I know more guys who've gotten a divorce, but my best friend and my partner has been my wife throughout this. And yeah, I mean, if it hadn't been for her, I had no doubt I probably wouldn't have lasted 23 years either, because I, you know, I'm very immature to begin with, even at 59 years old. So she kept me on the righteous path.
Well, mate, but behind every good man is an angel and an even better woman. So and
Yeah,
that's it, mate. And most that's the test, isn't it? Like most marriages, especially in a military or in a first responder space, the
right.
marriages there's more breakups than there are people that
Yeah,
stay together.
100%.
So, mate, knowing what you know now, what advice would you, and everything that you've been through, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
Wow, that's pretty good. Yeah. Don't worry. If my wife and I literally just had this conversation, I think yesterday. My entire life, I've always been a worrier and impatient.
I'm not. I'll
And I
join you. That's me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I would say, relax, don't worry, stop being so impatient, it'll come. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talking about religion, the hand of God. I'm finally at the point in my life I wish it hadn't taken so long, but I can see him guiding me throughout my life and my professional career as well. Not understanding why things were happening the way they were happening at the time, but now being able to look back and saying, oh, that's why I didn't get hired by DEA back then. That's why it took so long to do this. Yeah, right.
That's and Matt, I'm learning exactly the same thing, and yeah, like you, very faithful, and as we've spoken, off air, 11 years ago, I was standing on the edge of a cliff wanting to end my life, and here I
Wow.
am. Here I am now, mate. And it was just the hearing my late nana's voice that day to say, Adam, stop, step back, pick up the phone, and make a call. And mate, I
That's
know that
awesome.
I know that that was the hand of God that day. I know that
Yeah,
for and for you, like you and many others, mate, that I've spoken to, it's we're all very religious, and we're here to do a job, and everything happens when it's meant to happen.
right. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
And
awesome.
mate, how do people get in contact with you if they want to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way, is just to find me on LinkedIn. Especially for veterans and folks like you, I'm always willing to pick up the phone and talk to them. Yeah, yeah.
And Absolutely, and we'll put that in the show notes as well, mate. And mate, lastly, what are your plans going forward? You mentioned your family and your beautiful wife, and you've had, a kinetic career, and it has been kinetic. What are your plans going forward now with your family into the future?
I've got 4 grandkids now. My daughter, still lives up in Northern Virginia, where we just moved from. I'm now in South Alabama, tucked away in the woods where I can't see my neighbors. Yeah, as far as plans, I hope I can spend more time with my grandkids. I always promised my daughter that I'd try to be a better grandfather than I was a father, because I was so absent for so long. And, we're still working on that. But yeah, I mean, that's the plans. I'd like to try to be involved in their lives as they grow up, hopefully to be a positive influence. Try to find a wife for my son. He's in his late 30s, which is going to embarrass the hell out of him if he ever hears me say that. So, yeah, but I mean, look, we want more grandkids, my wife and I. So, yeah, I mean, just try to be involved with my family, my grandkids. Yeah.
And I think, mate, you've earned that of where you can enjoy being in the woods and enjoy, the peace after having such a kinetic first half of your life. I think you've
Sure.
earned the right to just chill out now, mate, and just calm down and just, as you say, spend time with the family. And mate, it's been an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on and share your story. And I know it's not easy, and I know coming on and doing these after what has happened. And mate, as I say, I do really appreciate you and our good friend Andy connecting us together. And mate, as I say, thank you. It's just been an absolute privilege.
Adam, it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.